Trevor, it's good on your side? Cool. And the floor is yours, Rob.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know when you guys can see it.
We got it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me. I met Jonathan maybe a few months ago now, and we just got to talking about a few things, and asked me to present at this, and kind of look through various dates and things, and we finally got it on the calendar. So, again, thanks everybody for letting me talk today, and I'll just get started. I try not to go through a ton of slides here, but that's kind of, I guess, how I stayed organized. So, bear with me on that, I guess. Maybe just first to start, just a quick introduction on who I am, my background, that kind of thing. So I'm not an Iowa State grad. I'm, UNI grad, an MIS and CIS minor. I always liked the sort of business and technology, just sort of the joint effort between those two types of things. That's kind of why I went that path. But started my career off as a software developer at a small tech company in the Des Moines area. Was there for about 4 or 5 years. Learned a whole lot. It was I think pretty good for me to start off at a small company, just because you had to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different things. And so, just really good place to start off. Then moved into, started working for a financial services trading brokerage that was actually headquartered out of New York. They had a Des Moines office. So I worked out of that office, and I was there for about 10 years, wore a lot of different hats while I was there. Started off with software development, but moved into a lot of data integration, data analytics, and then did some sort of general IT management. So went from software development to managing infrastructure and server farms and those types of things that big enterprise companies have to deal with. And right around that time was really when cloud was starting to get pretty big. So we started to work towards cloud transitions and things like that. So just learned a lot there, just both from a technical perspective. Learned a lot about how to manage people, how to interact with the business, how to understand what they wanted, those types of things. Then when I left there, I went and worked for a financial services, an annuities company for a little while, and then finally landed here at AgriSync as their CTO. So again, my background's fairly technical, but always sort of involved in that business side of things as well. I have 3 kids, born and raised in Iowa, enjoy outdoors activities, hiking, camping, snowmobiling, stuff I can have fun with outside. And then when I'm not outside and kind of getting my geek on a little bit, doing some IoT stuff just on the side, little hacking projects around the house, and then I do some 3D printing as well. So that's just, I guess, sort of who I am. So just as we kind of get into a little bit more about AgriSync, just want to talk about sort of just the ag tech landscape in general. And as you can see there, there's a lot of logos, icons, things here. I don't intend to kind of go through all these, but there's a lot of business and a lot of companies out there right now involved in different areas of ag tech, or farm tech is what this slide is I guess called. But just looking at sort of everything from just the digital agronomy side and production into sort of the management, and then into more of the financial side, whether it's marketing or trading or insurance, or those things is very much a big area as well. And then of course you get into some more specifics, whether it's precision agriculture or water management, irrigation, those types of things, clear into other just types of integrated solutions or other sort of platform-based systems that are either data-based or just there to help integrate different systems or things together. So this is, again, not a slide that we created or that's part of us, but AgriSync, according to this slide, I guess I would say fits kind of in that farm management software quadrant or area there. So it's kind of buried within those logos in that sense. But I would say, kind of what we do is a little unique comparatively to the rest of these logos on here, or the rest of these companies. And so that's what I'm going to kind of cover today is sort of what does AgriSync do? Where do we fit, in this landscape? How are we solving our customers' problems? And then just touch base a little bit on the technology that we're using. So that's kind of the general idea. One other just quick thing before I get into it. I mean, just this is a little bit of a cheesy slide, but I've worked for both, right? I've worked for startup, worked for corporate, and I think that there's pros and cons to each. At times it does feel like startups is you're just constantly rolling that ball up the hill and you never know when it's going to get down and roll the other side, and then on the corporate side, sometimes it feels like, sometimes you're running on a hamster wheel or you're not really going anywhere. So obviously, that's not always true in all the cases, but just my professional experience and kind of where, the things that I've done, I've seen both. And when you look back at that list of companies, prior to that, every one of those companies is in different states of that. So some of those are pretty big enterprises, pretty big companies. Others are just, startups, haven't made a dime yet, aren't profitable, and then there's companies in between. So, as you guys are going through college and university and just thinking through where you want to be, where you want to work for, the different types of companies, I think that if you can get a good range and good experience to just understand where you fit at that time in your life, I think is important. So my next slide here is a video. So I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that you guys will be able to hear and watch this. If it's really laggy or you can't hear it, I don't know, give me a thumbs down or let me know and I'll just move on. But I'm going to go ahead and hit play here.
Is there supposed to be sound? We can't hear it.
Ah, crap. Yes, there's supposed to be sound. I wonder. Let me stop presenting quick and see if I can get the sound to go. Yeah, it's not letting me do it. I wonder if it's because we're recording, won't record the sound. So I tried it earlier and it worked, but that option's not available. So I guess we'll skip the fancy video here. Not a problem. Really what this was gonna sort of highlight, and I'll cover on a few slides of just sort of what's the problem we're solving and how are our customers interacting with us, and just more of a marketing video. But I can send out a link to you guys later if you want to watch it. But AgriSync was founded in 2014, and really the primary goal for us is to help support remotely communication companies, services, dealerships essentially is our primary business. So how can we use technology to help people support their customers in a remote way and more efficient than what they were doing, sort of traditionally. So it's kind of a legacy problem, and using technology to help solve that problem. Currently, we're in about 200 different ag businesses or dealerships today in 6 different countries. Sort of from that 2014, a good chunk of those have probably been customers of ours or became customers of ours in the last 2 years of that. And we're on our version 3 of our software product, our suite of products from when it was founded in 2014. Just a quick note about kind of our team. There's about 24 of us. Most of these guys are full-time, some are contractors, and they're spread across the world. So my team, the product team of engineers, is spread in 6 countries and, I think 4 different time zones. And so it's somewhat challenging to get together and talk through things, talk through engineering problems, talk through scope problems. But we do a lot of tactics. We do a lot of online, meetings and things to try to make sure that we're all in sync and understand what success looks like. But spread across the different area of the world. My engineering team is made up of everything from sort of front-end engineers, back-end engineers, data, and then we've got some QA and some project management around that as well. So some of these faces on here represent that. And then also part of the broader AgriSync team is we've got people who are focused on our customers and customer success, as well as our marketing and sales, groups as well. But 3/4 of the company is wearing some sort of developer engineer hat, as we're building software. So if we kind of jump into just sort of like what's the problem AgriSync's trying to solve, if you think of sort of just a traditional communication channel between just a customer and what we call an advisor, so the person that you're trying to call to help, get some expertise or some help from. So in like a precision agriculture world, that could be somebody who understands and knows how to handle the precision agriculture equipment. It could be an agronomist. It could be, even a veterinarian, and maybe you're having an issue with an animal. So we're kind of lumping all those sort of personas together as what we call an advisor. And a lot of times what happens is a customer is maybe going to call that advisor directly on their mobile, and that advisor may not be available, or they're busy helping another customer. So, sometimes, it could be slow response because they're one person. If they're calling the direct cell phone, which happens a lot, there's no documentation. There's no, hey, this customer contacted me and here's what we talked about. Unless they're taking notes or putting sticky notes in their truck or, at their computer, those types of things. Employees do tend to get overloaded a lot of times. So what we found was in those dealerships where you have those advisors, a lot of times customers are calling day and night. There's no sort of on call or off call. It's just, hey, I've got a problem, I need help. Especially during busy times of the year, whether it's planting or harvest season, things like that. And then finally, just again, that single point of failure that creates. So if you can't get a hold of your advisor, the guy that you're supposed to call, what do you do? So sort of at the core of what AgriSync does is we really try to help solve a lot of these problems. And the first way we try to do that is through team-based support. So going from sort of a point to point to a team of people that can help you, solve that issue. And so what that does is, helps create those quick responses because you have multiple people that can help solve the problem or route it to the people that, could help you. AgriSync tracks all of that information. So how long you're on the phone call, some information about what you were doing with that phone call, which is really important for when it comes to, things like billing or service contracts. So if a customer has a billing agreement in place and you're going to pay X number of hours for help, or you're paying a set amount per month, for a service, it just helps the dealership keep track of all that stuff, which they weren't able to do easily before. Again, that shared workload. So you can have on-call schedules. You can have, just different people that are able to help, potentially even in different physical locations. And then also just frankly, it helps protect your personal, phone numbers and information. That seems kind of silly, but if your customer has your personal cell phone, what do you do on the weekends or, when you're out with family or out with friends and they need help? You can't separate yourself from that very easily, from that. So, AgriSync helps with that sort of process. And so what you're noticing probably here is a lot of what we deal with is the communication and phone communication specifically. But when you're seeing these arrows and sort of looking through that, it's not just voice communication. It could also be messaging, whether it's text messages or WhatsApp messages or things like that, as well as just video chats and things, of that type as well. So voice is obviously kind of the one a lot of people think of because, you get a support hotline that you call, and that's sort of the first, step into that. So when our customers hire us as a service, they hire us to help with this communication process. And a lot of times sort of work as sort of a virtual call center or a way to help get their customers connected to them. So just real quick, kind of just who are our customers or sort of examples of our customers. As I mentioned, we have over 200 customers now all over the world. Obviously, a lot of these are based in the U.S., and based in the farming regions of the world because that's where our primary customer bases are. And a lot of them are obviously in the ag space. But if you think of what our platform does and how it can help, it goes beyond just ag. It goes into just general machine support as well, and a dealer who's selling equipment. So as well as other things like I was talking about, in the animal health side of things. So veterinaries in the agronomy side of things. So if you've got questions on how your crops are growing, or if you're seeing certain pests or things that you need some help from an agronomist. And then we're also, sort of other non sort of primary ag stuff, but sort of that outer ag ring would be things like irrigation systems, or things like that help support the production of crops differently than just the physical, like tractors and things like that. So that's just some examples of the types of customers that we have. So kind of looking at like what's our technology stack, and I didn't go through and lay out everything here, but just kind of running through and throwing some logos on here of things that we deal with. Sort of first and foremost is we run most everything in microservices and in containers, and that's all orchestrated through Kubernetes. We do leverage all three public clouds, so Google Cloud, AWS, and Azure. We use those for different reasons, for different purposes, but we do leverage all three of those, and again, that's where Docker and Kubernetes come into play to help with that. We are, from a database perspective, we're Microsoft SQL Server based, and that's just mainly from a historical perspective of what we had, and it's worked, and we've stuck with it. But there's nothing crazy we're doing with SQL Server. It's just an SQL database that we just, have data in. Our mobile apps, so we support both iPhone or iOS and Android, and we do that through Xamarin, which is sort of a programming language that we can use to compile down to different, the different platforms. So rather than coding in native Java, for example, with Android, we do code in Xamarin and in C#. All of our C# that we use is all .NET Core, and everything runs in Linux .NET Core. We don't really use any Windows at all anymore. And a lot of those changes and things were some examples of things that we changed for our V3 release that we had earlier this year. It was kind of a new overall architecture. Python there is what we do. A lot of our data work in our data science, some of the computer vision stuff that we're starting to get into is all done through Python and PyTorch. And then likewise, a lot of our data pipeline work that we're doing when we're moving data from one system to another, or moving from data from one system into our data lake and doing analytics on it, is all done through Python. And then that last logo there is AngularJS. Our front end, our web platform's built on Angular today. So just a quick kind of run through, and I'm happy to answer questions if you guys have them now, or we can wait till the end if you want to go through that as well. Looking just real quick kind of at our high level architecture, and this is sort of a very high level diagram, but if you think of the user at the top, they'll access us through either a web browser or a mobile device, or a lot of times through a phone system. So, and typically that's like a PSTN or just a traditional phone number that would come in. If it is a phone interaction, it'll go through one of our communication providers that we get the phone numbers through and help us route those requests into our ecosystem essentially, and into our platform. On the front end, again, as I mentioned, we have a web application and we have mobile, and both of those support things like push notifications and our ability to make phone calls on the web, phone calls on mobile, things like that through voice over IP. All of that stuff, and basically all of those front end apps connect to us through our APIs. And so everything is API based. It's all token secured. And that's where a lot of our business logic all exists, and where a lot of the interactions happen. What I don't have on here is, and again, this is pretty high level, but if you think of some of the other microservices and things that we deal with, all of those run through our API ecosystem as well. And then, of course, the APIs work with our data layer, whether it's data stored in a database or in just raw blob storage. And then we have, again, what's not on here is caching layers in between some of these things. So, for speed and performance and sort of edge connectivity, we deal with that as well, from that standpoint. So nothing crazy here. I think this is a fairly common architecture that you would see. I think what makes us somewhat unique is, again, our the way we're integrating with our communication providers, and they sit out there almost as a facade or a proxy into our system. And they also then are our interface into, phone systems. Communication providers could be anything from like Twilio, which I'm sure you guys have heard of, or even like WhatsApp is a communication provider for us. So we integrate with WhatsApp's APIs, as an example, to have both messaging, voice, and audio come through us and interact with our APIs. So, kind of looking at like what's our development process, sort of first and foremost, it starts with customer feedback. So we really try hard to listen to what our customers want and say. And I think a lot of companies say that, but we really try hard to be good at that. And one of the things that our engineering team does is has a really good relationship with our customer success team. So they're the ones that are out talking to customers every day. They're training our customers on our software. They're onboarding new customers. They're the ones answering the helpline when somebody has an issue, all of those types of things. And so we really try hard to have a very regular interaction with our customer success team. And then they also have some tools out there to help get feedback and customer requests. So, they can post, hey, I want this feature, and other customers can vote on it. They can have, conversation, things like that. And all that information, essentially rolls into our development process. And again, we try to iterate fast, sort of through this. So we may not get everything done for the whole picture of what we want, but we try to get the minimum product out and then iterate, get feedback, iterate, get feedback, through part of that process. And the other thing we do is release software in beta as well, and release software through feature flagging and things like that. So we can turn things on and off for certain customers. We can release partial software or partial releases and not have the full feature turned on in case we want to test things or things like that. So having a good configuration based on that customer feedback and our ability to iterate as part of our release cycle, is pretty important. And we currently run on a 2-week sprint cycle. So when we start our sprint, when we start the work that we're doing, that stuff is getting shipped within 2 weeks. And so we ship stuff to our production environments every 2 weeks, both on, like the server side with our web applications and our APIs and our services, as well as in the app stores as well. So we update our apps, during that process as well. Everything is all running through GitHub and Git repositories, and we have continuous integration, continuous deployment across all of those repositories and all of those environments. So when developers are making changes, we do code reviews, we do PRs, and then we run those through the different environments to get quality assurance, and then our customer feedback, and then they go to a production environment. So all of that happens every 2 weeks, and we try to iterate through that as fast as we can, because the customers know what they want, and we want to listen to them. If I look at kind of just how does that look like, so if we break down like a customer feedback, say they want, some new feature. So an example would be, we've recently added a calls activity tab to our applications. So our customers can have more transparency into what's happening on the phone calls that come in and where do those things route to. So, as an example of that, as a customer feedback, we met with our customer feedback team or with our customer success team, talked about, what is the customer actually wanting to do, and we will document that. And then a lot of times what happens is we break that down into some research cards. And so we'll do some research on, okay, how do we want to implement this? Sometimes that means, we need to learn something new. Other times it means we just need to figure out, how this fit into the existing platform. And a lot of the outcome from that comes, basically some architecture guide or some documentation on how we want to tackle that. And that usually leads into building a proof of concept. So we may have a completely separate app that just is a proof of concept, or it may be a new page in our existing app or a new view in our mobile apps. But we kind of always start through that research and then move into our proof of concept phase. And then right at that point, that's when we start to roll back to customer success and sometimes even talk to our customers and show them what we've got to get that feedback to make sure we're hitting that mark. Sometimes POCs may even just be some mock-up screens and not even building and coding the full thing. It just varies based on what we're talking about. But usually there is some level of some interactive capability between our research and our proof of concept to then be able to go back and make sure we're going to hit the mark. And usually this type of stuff happens either before a sprint fully starts or right at the beginning of a sprint, depending on how complex things are and how sophisticated of POCs that we need to do. Once we've got through that POC phase, and we move into our minimum viable product, MVP. So that's just the minimum set of requirements that are the must-haves. So when we go through, here's what the customer wants, what are the things that they absolutely have to have, or this thing's not usable, as opposed to what are the things that are nice to have that we can get by with that aren't necessarily needed. And again, some of those things aren't known until we go through that POC and feedback process. So we don't always know what goes into the MVP right at the beginning. We may have to go through a few iterative cycles with a proof of concept to make sure we're hitting that mark. But once we release that MVP, that's usually when that feature becomes a beta feature within our applications. And again, that's when we start to turn that on for various customers based on their interest in helping us test, helping us give feedback, or a variety of other sort of examples or things. And then essentially we repeat that process. So whether that means we start off with a brand new feature or we go back through and we iterate again to make sort of the V2 or the V3 of that feature itself. And we go through that same process. Now we may be able to skip or not really need a lot of research at that point, depending on how those things change. But that's sort of just the general cycle that we go through, from that standpoint. The one thing I didn't mention here, as we're going through that, within that sprint cycle, we do publish and deploy our software to different environments. And sort of the two categories of that would be our production environments and then our non-production environments. So what we try to do is make sure that we are shipping the things that we want to ship, and we're not shipping the things that are not ready yet. And so that's all part of that CI/CD process, but then also part of our QA sign-off process. And sometimes our QAs will kick stuff back to the developers to fix something that they may not have seen or caught. And that could be, again, a sort of a cycle within this cycle as well, on that. So I went through that pretty fast, but I think you guys will find that that's a fairly common, there's nothing unique here necessarily, and I think all companies have different levels of sophistication and automation to support this. But when you think of how do we build the software, how do we understand what that solution needs to be, this is really the process that we go through. We don't build, and then ship it at the end and then hope we got it right. We try to iterate fast, get feedback, get more feedback, and deploy those things. So that's about all I have, guys. I didn't take a whole ton of time here. I know I had the whole hour, but do you guys have questions, comments, thoughts for me at all? I mean, just really anything. Leave it pretty open-ended.
I have a question here about like your pipelines and stuff like that.
Yep.
So, I guess it's kind of two questions. What service do you use for your CI/CD, and like how automated is that? Do you have to like move things from dev into prod, or is that?
Yeah. So it's changed over the last, I would say, 9 to 10 months. But at this stage, like when I'm talking today, everything is on GitHub, and we use GitHub Actions that trigger those builds or deployments depending on what we're doing. So typically the workflow would be you're writing code in the master or the main branch on your Git repo. And what happens is when we get a task or we get a feature request to go build something, you'll make a branch from that. And a lot of times we name it just what the feature is or whatever. Do your coding. And then when you're done with your coding and you're ready for a pull request and peer review, you'll create that PR. And then the other developer who reviews the PR, assuming that everything goes well, will approve the PR, and then we merge that change set back into the development branch. And then at the same time, that same change set gets pushed into our QA environment through a build. So in some cases, we have separate branches specifically for that. In other cases, it's just a trigger. It kind of depends on the code repository and the service that we've got and how sophisticated we need it. But essentially at that point, once a developer is done with development, then it goes into a ready for QA state. And then that's when it gets deployed into our QA environment, where our QAs will come in and do the testing that they need to. From an automated perspective, again, that's just a PR and a merge and everything happens. Test coverage, unit test coverage, all that stuff will be running as well. And then again, depending on the repository, there may be some thresholds that have to be met before we let things move out of the developer hands into the QA hands. From a test coverage and linting and that kind of stuff to make sure we're following good guidelines and coding practices. But all that is automated. Once the QA gets it, then they do their testing, whether it's regression testing or some automated tests or things like that. And once they sign off and say, yep, this is ready to go, then we basically repeat that same process, and then it goes to what we call stage, which is that's when sort of we designate it as a release candidate. So that feature set doesn't become part of a release candidate until it's passed our QA, and development checks. And again, that's all automated through PR processes. So we use GitHub to do all of that process. Once it hits stage, then that's when our product manager and some of our customer success team, and in some cases, some customers will come in and test in a stage environment or sort of that beta pre-release environment. And if those things pass, then that feature set, that release moves from a release candidate into the full release. The full release is the only thing that's really not automated in that whole process as far as, being able to have things happen, because we don't want to release things to production without some good controls and process in place. So the actual actions themselves are automated, but the PR and some of those approvals and some of that stuff does require some extra approval and some sort of approval gates, so to speak. But the actual moving of code and all that stuff and building the code is all automated. With Kubernetes and Docker and microservices and things, a lot of times what happens during that process is the code gets built and then pushed out to our container repository, and then those things are tagged and versioned essentially based on where we're at in that life cycle. And then depending again on where we're deploying, we'll run various, kube control scripts, different YAML files that we've got that set that environment, and we'll do that deployment. And so GitHub Actions is simply just calling, the kube control command and telling it what to do based on, where things are. So for example, if we're building a new release, we'll build the release, push that out to our container repository, and then the next step in our workflow is simply just to tell Kubernetes, hey, go grab the newest image with this tag and make a new deployment, and away you go. Is typically the way that process works. So all of that's automated, from that standpoint. We just have a few manual approval gates depending on where it's at in that life cycle. Hopefully I answered your question there.
Yeah, definitely.
Did I bore the rest of you guys to death, or if you have other engineering question? I didn't get too technical. I can if you guys want. I just wasn't quite sure, what everyone would be comfortable with and whatever, but I really wanted to just sort of focus in on the higher level sort of problems we're solving. I know that support is not the sexiest thing. We're not into fancy drones or precision agriculture or anything like that, but when that stuff breaks, you're going to want help. And that's what AgriSync does, is help make sure you can get help, whether in the field or wherever, or, if you're working with your customers and you're driving all over the state, you need to do things remotely, and we want to help make a system to make your life easier with that. So things that are coming like on our roadmap are more of a partner API. So again, everything's API based, but we're starting to get more requests for customers to build their own integrations into AgriSync. So that stuff's starting to come, and then integrations into other like customer relationship management systems like Salesforce or Dynamics. Those things are those are in flight right now. Other channels like we talked about with like WhatsApp, that's a pretty new area for us, communicating through that channel, just given how much of the world uses WhatsApp compared to the US. So those are just some examples of things. Our job and our goal is to be able to communicate to where the customers are, not where we want them to be, right? So if the customers use WhatsApp, then that's where we need to be. If they're in the US and they're just used to getting out their flip phone and making a phone call, they can still use AgriSync through that. They never have to create an account. They don't have to download an app on their smartphone. They just work, and we keep track of things on the back end. So our founder calls it sort of this low friction experience, and that's one thing that we really tried to hit home on, with that, and that really resonates, pretty well, especially when a lot of the end customers are not necessarily the most technically savvy, or they have so much technology they don't want to have to learn another thing. So that's pretty important for us. I don't know, any other questions, guys, or thoughts, comments?
I had a question about, I guess, the whole product. So I remember you saying that you use a lot of the mobile applications to have customers reach out through voice or through other means. But is there like a really useful feature that they've noticed or that they really like about AgriSync that makes it more helpful than just texting or calling?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. So, and I wish that one video that I played would have worked. You guys could have heard that because it would have shown a few examples of that. But looking through the lens of a grower or a farmer, that end customer, I think honestly one of the things that they like the most is how easy it is to get in and work through the system. But where it gets important is if you're on the other end and you're the advisor trying to help, we use technology that allows you to not have to have an app, but you can get on a video session just like we're doing right now. So a lot of times what happens is you may call into a hotline, say, hey, I'm having this problem. And then the advisor on the other side says, hang on, I'm going to text you a link. And then that customer gets the link, they click it, they say, allow video and audio, and then immediately you're on a live video session. So now the customer can just show you what's going wrong versus what you're trying to explain. And I think that's not necessarily all that unique, but the fact that end customer doesn't have to go download an app, create an account, and go through that whole process, you're just immediately on that. And then on top of all that, the advisor gets all that information tracked and can categorize his time, understand the types of problems that they're seeing, so they can do different analytics on to see what's trending, what's not. So, the farmer can basically get on his way and continue doing what he's doing and have very little to do. On the advisor side, we track things and make it easier for them to, do their management side of things that they have to do once they're done helping customers. Another use case that we're finding, I think a lot because of COVID, is parts teams and parts departments within dealerships. So those traditionally are, people that work behind the counter at a dealership, and they have sticky notes all over the place, and somebody calls in and says, I need part number 123, and they'll take a sticky note and write it down and then let the customer go, and then they'll go into their system and order the part or whatever. Customers are starting to use us to text a picture of a part that they need or make a quick video and text it in, and then that creates basically like a work order or a part order through the AgriSync system, and then it allows parts teams to stay organized and as well work remotely. So a lot of times their parts software is kind of like mainframe, or there's no way they're going to have a mobile app for their customers to use to order parts. So they're using us to kind of go through and use images and text to help go through that process. We do some computer vision and OCR type of work. So if you take a picture of a part that has a barcode, we'll OCR that. We'll grab the serial number or the barcode off of it and put that information right in, which then fits into other integration systems. We're also starting to use computer vision to detect different types of equipment and activities and machinery, which helps, again, track the types of issues or things that are going on. So if you take a picture of an oil pump as an example, we use computer vision to detect that it's an oil pump, detect the model that it is, and then help that parts department, get the information they need quicker using images versus having to use text. And again, that all happens and the customer doesn't ever have to download an app or do anything fancy to make that happen. So those are, again, examples of sort of on both sides, how we're using that technology to make things easier for them.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Thank you.
Well, if you guys have any other questions, I can certainly stop here. But Jonathan, if you want to share my information with the group, and if anyone wants to send me a note later on or want to have a chat or something, I'm happy to do that as well. If you come up with other questions or just want to know more things or whatever, I'm happy to talk about it as well. So feel free to leave my contact information. I probably should have made a slide for that, but I didn't. So feel free to share that.
Yeah, it's all good. I will send an email to everyone with your information. If you want to send me anything, I can send that out too.
Sure.
But yeah, thanks so much for giving this talk. It was really cool. Stuff you're working on is really interesting. It's definitely not necessarily like you said, it's not the sexiest part of tech, but it's still extremely important. I mean, without this, it's hard to get connected with people.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop recording.